What's poppin', my Daredevils? It is me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. Episode 7 of Daredevil Born Again had my black ass on the edge of my mother freaking seat, and I am itching to talk about it with you guys. So, let's just go ahead and jump into it. Spoilers ahead, by the way, so don't say I didn't warn you. The episode starts at the mayor's office, as Danny Blake and Buck Cashman inform the Big Apple's big man that Daredevil is back patrolling the streets after he successfully saved Angela Del Toro's life inside of Muse's abandoned subway hideout. Daniel mentions that Angela had around 2,500 milliliters of blood siphoned out of her body by Muse, which is actually a crazy amount, as the human body typically has around 4,500 to 5,700 milliliters of blood. So that was around like half of this girl's life force. Needless to say, Daredevil definitely arrived with that emergency can of whoop-ass right on time. And the revelation of Daredevil's resurgence appears to hit Fisk rather interestingly, with his reaction almost being one of fear mixed with excitement. I mean, we do know that Fisk has kept his blood smeared on his favorite rabbit in a snowstorm painting that he keeps in his secret dinner dungeon, so it is clear that his defeat at the hands of Daredevil at the end of the last Netflix season has still got Big Willie feeling kind of shook and silly. But it also seems like there is also a twinge of excitement there, as he now has a legal excuse to hunt down the man who ruined his 10-year empire. Then, after the intro, we get a shot of the streets of New York City, showing us a bus shelter ad for both the New York Bulletin, the newspaper that both Ben Urich and Karen Page used to work at, as well as for the fictional Winston Supreme Canadian Whiskey, Marvel's parody of the real-life Windsor Supreme Canadian Whiskey ever since it was first introduced on the cover and pages of 1979's Iron Man number 128 as part of Iron Man's infamous Demon in a Bottle story, where Tony Stark struggles with his alcoholism. Winston Supreme is also the favorite whiskey of Jessica Jones in season 1 of her show, and a young Howard Stark would even drop one of these expensive bottles on the floor when he was experimenting on a weird gravitational anomaly around Agent Carter in season 2 of her show.
Damn. Should've used the cheap stuff.
Then, not long after this, we catch up with Matt and Heather. And as Matt gets ready for work, Heather calls Matt out on his closed-off nature, knowing that he's not telling her the full truth as to where he got all those bruises. Ben Affleck's Daredevil also had problems with his Heather Glenn in the 2003 Daredevil film universe, when Heather would break up with him over the phone for being so distant and preoccupied.
Matt, it's Heather. Are you there? Of course you're not there. You're never there.
And also, hey, do not forget to stop by the Heavy Spoiler store to pick up one of our 2 double-sided Daredevil Born Again inspired shirts, especially since we just dropped our new Retribution shirt inspired by the Punisher Frank Castle himself. On the back of the shirt is a sick-as-hell design of a bunch of guns in the form of a skull, and on the front of the shirt is a picture of a kid saying, "Go get him," just like Frank's kid says to him from the great beyond. And we also have our Conviction shirts, which features a hero praying without fear with a sonar halo on the back and the sword and scales of Lady Justice on the front. You can buy one or both of these designs over at the Heavy Spoilers merch store, so stop on by today. Then, when Matt heads to the offices of Murdock and McDuffie, Cherry immediately chastises Matt for suiting up as Daredevil again and jeopardizing the new life that he's built after Foggy's death, and rejects Matt's request for help with tracking Muse down. A frustrated Matt would respond to this by trying to guilt Cherry by reminding Cherry how he's always responded to Cherry's calls for help when Cherry still worked as an NYPD detective, with their relationship very much mirroring that of Batman and Commissioner Gordon's from DC Comics, in my opinion. However, Kirsten is not a big fan of being left out of the loop when it comes to all these secret conversations that Matt is having with Cherry and others in her office, and would confront Cherry about this later on, which greatly differs from the comics, where comic book Kirsten pretty much immediately figures out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil on her own. Matt then heads to go see Angelo Del Toro himself at the hospital, where Angela's name can be seen written on the whiteboard behind him. This is then followed by Angela Del Toro waking up in the hospital after her brief brush with death, with Angela's physical resurrection likely also symbolically representing the end of her old life and the start of her own personal journey towards becoming the next White Tiger. I mean, sometimes stories use brief brushes with death to help illustrate a character ending and starting a new period of their lives. For example, the first Black Panther movie saw T'Challa's old self die after he was brought back from from death's door after losing the challenge for king. No longer was T'Challa content with Wakanda not helping out the rest of the world, and he even goes as far as telling the ancestors off right before he's brought back to life. And we also saw this with both Iron Man and Thor as well in their first respective movies, as their own brushes with death would cause them to be reborn into the heroes that they were always meant to be. And we, of course, cannot forget the universally beloved masterpiece that is Secret Invasion, where the character Gaia is shot and briefly dies, only for her powers to kick in for the first time, resurrecting her and starting a new chapter in her concerningly overpowered life. But at any rate, we don't know whether or not Angela Del Toro will actually end up becoming the next White Tiger just yet. But with her now being reborn, now seems like the right time in her character journey to start sewing herself a White Tiger suit, especially considering Angela's ever-growing hatred towards the NYPD and how they can't be trusted to protect the people like her uncle was. But anyways, Angela tells Matt that Muse's murder basement was filled with bloody portraits of human faces, which is exactly what we see when Detective Kim and the NYPD go to check out Muse's former headquarters, along with empty jugs of blood, some hanging human bodies, a bunch of needles, spray paint cans, and paint buckets. And one of the blood paintings of a screaming man with sharp teeth actually startles Detective Kim herself, with this image likely being one of Muse's suffering victims as he sucked the blood out of their body like a vampire. But hey, speaking of vampires, this is just a wild and fun theory here, but with all these bloody murals having been plastered all over New York City by Muse, I think that there is at least a small possibility that these murals could potentially factor into a Blade story in the future featuring Mahershala Ali. I mean, if Mahershala is an 86 freaking years old when they decide to start filming anyway. I mean, if you've seen the original Blade trilogy of movies, then you probably know how sensitive a vampire's nose is to the smell of blood. So if New York City is covered in this tasty smelling blood that a vampiric nose might find irresistible, then New York City might see a rising influx of vampire activity that vampire hunters like Blade might have to address. Again, I don't know if that's actually going to happen. It's just a fun idea that I think Marvel should at least mention in their upcoming Blade project if it's set in New York City. But after analyzing Muse's lair, Detective Kim would soon nail down Hunter Dewin's Bastion Cooper character as their main suspect, and report these findings directly to Mayor Fisk herself, who then alerts his task force. In the comics, Muse has never actually gone by the name Bastion Cooper, as the villain's real name has actually never been revealed. And this is actually the second Marvel Studios villain named Bastion to hit Disney Plus within the span of a year, due to X-Men 97 also having one of its main villains named Bastion as well. But speaking of this anti-vigilante task force, we see them poring over Muse's underground art studio later on before Daredevil arrives on the scene to do some investigating of his own. I'm not sure why Matt didn't take the time to look over all of this stuff after dropping Angela off at the hospital the night before, but hey, at least we got to see Daredevil bonk Officer Powell on the noggin with his billy club. Like, I legitimately laughed so hard at that. But right before Daredevil arrives, we can see the officers looking over a number of Muse's blood art sketches, including this one that says Vigilante Justice on it, and this one here on the left that appears to depict Muse with a torch alongside the words "Seeing Me" and "Seeing the Invisible." During Bastion's therapy session with Heather, he notes that he has this dream of being invisible at his own 8th birthday party, not being able to be seen by his parents. A very likely reflection of how his parents would routinely ignore Bastion's own desires for his own life, making him do shit that he doesn't want to do, like become an elite taekwondo master at 16. But don't you worry, Bastion would end up killing his instructor 3 months into his training like a normal person. Totally normal human activity. Then, inside of one of Muse's sketchbooks, we can see a sketch of Wilson Fisk with a dollar crown, with a picture of Muse's face on the opposite page on top. And as the cops box up all the evidence, you can also see the word "triggered" with a Punisher skull in the background, a sketch that Muse would make before spraying the mural outside of Matt and Cherry's witness safe house from episode 3. And under that is an image of a bull, which we saw Muse turn into the Kingpin ass-kissing mural from episode 6. And when the cops leave, Daredevil then drops from the ceiling like the fallen angel that he is. And as he does, we can also see that Muse has blood painted an image of the Punisher holding a gun next to this bull painting. Daredevil, with no time to waste, starts feeling through Muse's artworks, first feeling a picture of Muse with the words "Kill all lies," then another one of him standing with a torch with the words "Channel the truth" around it, followed by yet another draft of the triggered Punisher skull mural inside of his sketchbook. However, the most concerning images of all were the repeated drawings of Matt's girlfriend, Heather Glenn, which prompts Daredevil to rush to her office immediately, just as Heather was quickly realizing that she herself was Muse's muse, and being so would soon be the next victim for an art piece that means a lot to Muse personally, as it was Heather herself that inspired Muse to start playing Psycho Splatoon in a bloody mask in the first place. And when Daredevil arrives at Karen's office, the two immediately begin round 2 of their ongoing war, with my personal favorite moment of the fight happening when Daredevil yoinks the hell out of Muse with a grappling hook inside of his billy club, like, "Get over here," like he was Scorpion in Mortal Kombat. And as Daredevil does, he accidentally starts painting the cloth on the ground with Muse's blood, helping create Muse's final art piece for when Heather would finish Muse off with 4 bullets to the center of his chest. And as Muse bleeds out on the bloody tarp, we can see his body lying on the ground with his right arm up and his left arm down, much like Muse is pictured in his selfie Statue of Liberty mural from episode 6. Since Muse being invisible was one of his life's biggest frustrations, him holding the torch of New York's most iconic symbol is symbolic of his desire to get people to see him and his art. Him lying there also looks like he's trying to wave at someone in an attempt to get their attention as well. Like, I truly love this piece of cinematography here. Daredevil then stabilizes Heather's injuries before officers Cole, North, and Powell bust in with Fisk's anti-vigilante task force to secure Heather and later take credit for her kill, in order to gain support and legitimacy in the eyes of the people. And speaking of Kingpin's anti-vigilante task force, if a recent rumor from Danielle RPK is to be believed, it looks like season 2 of Daredevil Born Again might just center around Daredevil assembling a team of his own to combat against Kingpin's task force. I mean, whether or not this team will end up being a reunion of his Defender squad or a completely new team of vigilantes has yet to be seen. But I am definitely amped at the possibility of Daredevil building his own army to stand up against anti-vigilante laws, much like Steve Rogers did in Civil War. But anyways, though Heather would survive this ordeal, part of me does wonder if Matt and Heather's relationship will be able to survive it as well, as Heather's first ever up-close and personal experience with a masked individual was incredibly scarring and traumatic for her. So if Matthew is going to continue to be Daredevil, then he's going to have to come clean to Heather about his double life eventually. And when he does, I'm very curious as to how Heather herself is going to react. Because right before Daredevil came to save her, Heather told Muse that anyone who wears a mask is a coward, which could be a strong sign that Heather herself now has no love for masked individuals of any kind, even though Daredevil was the one that did save her life. Not only this, but by hiding his Daredevil life from Heather for so long, Matt has been putting on a fake mask throughout his entire relationship. So Heather discovering him keeping such a secret from her for so long might cause Heather to see Matthew as a coward who was afraid of being vulnerable with her specifically, especially if she were to find out that Matt's ex Karen knew about this before her, because she did express that twinge of jealousy of their past relationship at the start of this episode. But we shall see. I'm honestly super surprised that Heather did not die in this episode, because her ass is mega dead in the comics after her character would unalive herself in 1985's Daredevil number 220. So I figured that because of this and the fact that Heather doesn't actually end up with Matt in the long term in the comics, would mean that she was going to end up as one of Muse's victims eventually during this season. But it turns out she's made it out just fine, so it seems like the actual end of their relationship might end up being due to Matt's secretive lifestyle instead, which is a lot better than dying in my opinion, and it would be an ending that I would prefer for Heather because I really do love her character. Like, she's literally the therapist that Matt has always needed. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. You guys can follow me at Mastertainment on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Blue Sky, wherever I am on the internet, but most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here on YouTube by hitting the subscribe button and maybe even hitting that like button if you guys enjoyed the video. But like always, you guys have been amazing. I love you guys so much, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.